to the Success is Subjective podcast series brought to you by collegealternative.org, presented by Lilley Consulting. I'm your host, Joanna Lilley. In today's episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Samantha Kolkey. Samantha is a licensed clinical social worker in Illinois. She received her BA in Psychology and Women's Studies from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor and her master's degree in social work from Jane Addams College of Social Work at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Samantha has dedicated her career to uplifting the lives and voices of children, adolescents, young adults, and families. She began her career working as a case manager and clinician for children, youth, and families within the Illinois child welfare system. In 2017, Samantha left the child welfare field after 6 years and began working as the Director of Programming for Options for College Success, which is a nonprofit organization supporting developmentally disabled young adults by empowering the individuals to identify their strengths, embracing their neurodivergences, and providing the tools to navigate all areas of their life in a neurotypical world. Samantha was voted in as the Executive Director of the organization in January of 2018. In addition to this role, Samantha carries a part-time caseload as a clinician for a private practice providing individual therapeutic support to individuals 15 years of age and older, focusing on anxiety, trauma, life transitions, ADHD, ASD, and executive function challenges. To bring more balance to her life, Samantha dedicates herself to the practice of meditation. She also enjoys dancing, drawing, attempting to garden, listening to vinyl records, and playing with her dog. Now, Samantha was diagnosed in her mid-20s with ADHD. Embracing her neurodivergence inspires Samantha's wholehearted approach to her work, leaning into her personal values of vulnerability, connection, collaboration, and empathy. Samantha believes in approaching everything with compassion and encouraging a growth mindset. Let's not wait any longer. Here's Samantha. All right, Samantha, I'm super excited to have you on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
I'm really excited to be here. I know that when we first met, I had said that the philosophy I have at times is success is subjective. And you said, I have a podcast called that. So I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's perfect. It's meant to be. So Let's just jump in. I don't know your complete history. So why don't you actually tell the listeners, where did you grow up? And then what was the messaging that you were hearing either from your family or the community in which you were raised about post-secondary education?
So I was born in Evanston, Illinois, which is where I work now. And around the age of 5, I moved with my family to Hong Kong as my father's job required him to do so, to work on international marketing campaigns. So I lived there for 3 years, and then we moved to Sydney, Australia for 3 years. And that experience was wonderful. I wouldn't trade it for anything, and we were able to travel more freely. It's easier to get to other countries on that side of the world. And that did lead me, though, to try and figure out how to fit in from such a young age. So when we moved to Hong Kong, I started to engage with my peers through observing, things from an outside perspective and trying to fit into that. And that kind of set me up for future challenges, which I will get into shortly. That also carried over then into Sydney, Australia. So I was paying attention to the school culture there and what the kids were interested in, which was different than when I was in Hong Kong, of course. So it was really adapting to my environment. And I did that by observing and then trying to fit in and follow the norm in quotes. So after 3 years in Sydney, I was turning 12. We moved back to the United States and to a suburb that is a little bit down the road from Evanston. So this suburb is part of what people in Illinois will refer to as the North Shore. Very high expectations, very wealthy community, and also a strong lack of diversity. So when I moved back, I was at the very difficult age of 12 and had to go into sixth grade. And again, to fit in, observed what was going on around me and tried to fit into that. So, really, my whole first part of my childhood was not necessarily asking myself, what do I want to do? Do I want to, do what everybody else is doing? Is thinking for myself okay and part of the norm? So that was difficult. And again, how I survived, if you will, moving through the early part of my childhood and then into middle school. And I was able to make a great group of friends that I still am connected with today, but it was a culture shock as well. So the individuals at my school were interested in so many different things and at kind of a developmental level that was above what I was in Australia. So they were dating and, well, whatever dating means back in sixth grade. And, there was, of course, a lot of gossip and drama. So that was really unusual and overwhelming for me to handle. And I really just went along and kind of go with the flow. The challenge also of the North Shore is that the expectation for everyone is you go to college, a 4-year school, you get a well-paying job, get a house, et cetera, et cetera. So, the family, 2 kids, picket fence, all of that. So that was my introduction to even thinking about post-secondary education. My parents never seemed to hyper focus on grades or anything like that. They both went to college, and my dad has a master's degree. And my mother actually went to a continuing education within the field of interior design when she was in her 40s. So I saw post-secondary education as a way to explore one's interests more and not as a requirement. So that was helpful. And like I said, my parents never focused on grades. It was mainly about the effort and also trying to help me not set such high, unreasonable expectations for myself. So they were wonderful. The school, however, the high school that I went to was inherently shaming. Now that I reflect on it, they had a level system for academics. So level 3 was quote unquote average. Level 2 was definitely framed as below average. And level 4 was what you should strive for. And walking into that was just an immediate judgment, is not setting up in me for success. So throughout high school, again, tried to follow the norm by getting really good grades, or what I thought was the norm, getting really good grades, working incredibly hard. School did not come easy for me. I just tried to do what was asked of me and then really struggled through every assignment. And I remember my friends all saying like, oh, that was so easy, or they were done with their homework, after an hour or two. And I was spending, 5 hours and during free periods as well, trying to get things done. So I successfully, and I did well in high school, but it wasn't necessarily for myself. It was for the image that I would present and trying to fit into the culture of the North Shore. So that brought me then to, I guess, junior and senior year, when we start talking about college and going to college. There was never an emphasis on what other options there are. So gap year, community college, they didn't tell me what an associate's degree was. They did not talk really about preparing for college in the sense of you can get accommodations, you can, how this is how you talk to a professor. There was not a lot of setup for me to develop more individual thinking or critical thinking for myself. I didn't ask a lot of questions. I just kind of went with what I was told. So I didn't know that there was any other option other than college. My parents didn't seem to push it. I don't know how they would have reacted if I wanted to take a year or said I didn't want to go. However, knowing my parents, I feel like they would have said, okay, great, but still asking me why I wouldn't want to go to college. So I got into and went to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and that was a great experience. I still struggled through classes because I had set myself up to not do a lot of critical thinking and not asking questions of like, why is it this way? Why do I have to do it this way? And that has continued to haunt me, if you will, throughout my life in terms of not asking enough questions, not being able to think for myself. So the classes that I very much enjoyed were the discussion classes, but it was really hard for me to speak up and formulate my thoughts because I had never really thought for myself. After graduating from college, I had a job for a little over a year in a field that I really enjoyed, so within social work. And after a year and some months, at that job, I was let go or fired from that job. They did not explain to me why. And again, I didn't ask questions. I was ashamed. I was, horribly embarrassed. And I knew I had done my job and done a really good job, but I didn't quite understand why I had been fired. That was almost traumatizing to me, where I had to move home. I had to, I felt like I was starting from scratch and didn't know what to do or what I was good at. So after a few months and also feeling bad about myself, I decided to apply to graduate school, and I decided to focus in social work. The school was great. And then halfway through, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And when I learned about that, it was life-changing and also very helpful to put in perspective what high school was like for me through that lens of ADHD, as well as, the anxiety that can come along with it and perfectionism of trying to keep up with your peers and trying to fit in and to be successful. And they didn't talk about learning disabilities or developmental disabilities, neurodevelopmental disabilities. Those were all seen as, negative and deficit focused. And however, it still was a relief for me to find that out. And I've been learning more about it as I've grown in my career too. And it has led to me feeling very empowered and being proud to say I'm neurodivergent. So that is a very long way, I guess, of explaining why or how post-secondary education was framed for me and where I grew up.
Well, and I mean, you transitioned into all of the pieces, right? Like where you went to school, how the college experience was for you, and now kind of looking back several years post-graduation, like how, not just from your college experience, but high school, right? Like all of it, academic,
Yes.
social, emotional, like how everything that kind of happened to you was a product of not just the nature and nurture of living abroad, but also being neurodiverse and not knowing it until later in life, right? So you like really had to fight for that fitting in piece. And culturally
Yes.
speaking, I think you hit the nail on the head. There are places in the US, and it's great to hear that your parents, like you think, that had you decided,
Yes.
I'm not going to go to college, that your parents would have supported you. They still would have asked the why, but it wouldn't have been judgmental or pressing to get you to change your mind. It just would have been more like, here you are, leading to that critical thinking piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Samantha, you don't
Yes.
have to go to
Yes.
college, but we are college educated. So tell us, what's your plan instead, right? What is your decision? But a part of that too
So getting a diagnosis later in life too, you said you didn't even get it until you were in grad school. That's significant. That's
Yes.
life-changing in your mid-20s. So
Yes.
so kind of fill us in on that piece. Like, now you have your master's in social work, you're newly diagnosed with ADHD, the light bulb has gone off, right? Because now you're able to look back and go, "Oh my gosh. Why was this so, like, no wonder this was so stinking hard." But how do you take that then and use that lens to actually like benefit you personally and professionally now that you have an MSW?
So it was definitely life-changing. The light bulb statement you made is spot on. At that time, I'm making it sound like it was 20 years ago. It wasn't. But still, at that time, it was 10 years ago. So at that time, it still was, again, focused on deficits. The term neurodiversity and neurodivergence, yes, it existed in the 90s, but it wasn't commonly used at all. And so there's still some shame around that. And I'm still battling shame from, just living with it since I was 5. So that is something I struggle with throughout my career now. But getting that diagnosis was incredibly helpful. However, I didn't learn that you could get accommodations for school until I started working where I'm working now, supporting neurodivergent students. So that was an eye-opener, and it has now led me to I definitely embrace my neurodivergence, and I find it empowering to talk about it as well as to be vulnerable and sharing it so that other individuals and individuals I work with understand that it's not a problem. There's not a character flaw. Things are just made more challenging because of the world that we live in, and it hasn't been built for us. And also with people being diagnosed more accurately now, my story has been helpful as people are talking about this more, and there are more frequent diagnoses, especially for women. So I flew under the radar because I appeared on paper to be smart and able, despite them knowing what was going on in my head and the, panic attacks I was battling and feeling depressed. I will say that getting a diagnosis was difficult, and also that journey was full of shame because I would be given diagnoses of, a mood disorder or, specifically major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, at one point bipolar type 2, and nothing through that lens, like any interventions or treatment through that lens, was successful. So with ADHD and learning more about it, and also with medication, I started to feel like myself. And that also allowed me then more freedom to reflect on what I've been through, and in a way that wasn't judgmental of myself or critical of myself, more forgiving and accepting of myself. So I don't know if that answers your question directly, but that diagnosis was very powerful. And I believe that vulnerability with clients and individuals I work with is incredibly important to build the rapport and trust, but also sharing a lived experience allows the individuals I work with to see and understand that these diagnoses or labels are not the end of the world, and actually can bring you to places that you really want to be.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So you kind of alluded to this. Tell us a little bit, like, what are you doing right
Yes.
now? Where do you work? What do you do? Because you kind of like, you hinted at it, right? Like, hey, my diagnosis is now like, it actually informs the work that I do with the young people that I'm serving. So tell us what you're doing.
So I want to preface this by saying that when I graduated from my master's program, I was working within the child welfare system, and that was definitely challenging. And I also remember saying to myself, I am never going to be a supervisor. I never want to lead or manage people. I can't do it. And then I was given this opportunity to become a director at this nonprofit that I still work at in Evanston called Options for College Success, where we support young adults with developmental disabilities to succeed academically, work productively, and live as independently as possible. We use a neurodiversity model and will view the individuals in our program through that lens, which has it's been quite incredible to see when you shift the lens or look through another lens outside of deficits, the changes that individuals are motivated then to make for themselves it's beautiful to see, really. So the organization I'm at right now is the director of programming, and then I was voted in to be the executive director in 2018, and that was terrifying. And of course, a lot of imposter syndrome that has gone on. But I found that this challenge has allowed me to see what I am capable of and find the type of role that I thrive in, as well as being able to have the freedom to be creative and build something that is of great value to the community and is at the forefront of where the disability community is right now by following this neurodiversity model. And what's really, really cool is that the organization is led and staffed by all neurodivergent people. So none of us can say that we're neurotypical, and sometimes that may scare parents and caregivers, but it is incredibly valuable to have us working with young adults who are neurodivergent, because we've had that lived experience and can model and demonstrate that individuals can overcome what makes them feel stuck and depressed and full of shame, and helping them to rewrite their narrative. And what brought us to, well, you and I, Joanna, what brought us to the topic of success, and success is subjective, is that we began a group when we returned from shelter in place in Illinois during the global pandemic. We returned to in-person in June of 2020, and we began a group called the Successes Group. And that entails throughout the week, we will ask our students what their successes have been for the day, for the week, and help them initially to understand that they can define success for themselves. It's not getting a bachelor's degree. It's not having a job that pays six figures. It's not, following this linear path. And we have individuals write up their successes and put it on a board that's in our main hallway at our center. Staff do it too. I bring this into staff meetings as well. The idea of identifying successes and what they are specifically for the individual. So we define that as a prompt to say, like, think about challenges that you've moved through, the breaking things down and seeing what your day has consisted of and how you've been successful, and using that word of success, which can be, for lack of a better word, a challenging word to sit with, because people see it as an objective thing. It takes a little bit of time for the individuals to latch on to that idea and that they can define success for themselves. But now our students are coming into our offices or just to the group, which we hold every Friday, and everybody shares their successes either from the board or, coming up with their own in that moment. And staff participate in that. And it's really just listening to everyone share their successes and supporting one another in those, praising one another for those, validating that, and allowing individuals to stop the automatic negative thought patterns that that we all struggle with. So I realized that I cut myself off, I think, in the middle of my statement. So my ADHD is showing. Anyway, that group has been incredible because we've been able to continue that every single week. We have it up on a board. So that's one of the first things that people see. And students will come into our offices and without being asked the question, just say, okay, so my successes for today are this. Or in the middle of a conversation when we're all hanging out in the lounge that we have, someone will be talking and say, like, so I had a really big success today. And then they continue. And some of these successes are, if somebody struggles with getting up out of bed and they have depression, sitting up and putting your feet on the floor, even if you go back to sleep, putting your feet on the floor was a huge success. So things like that was moving through a challenge, and even with the outcome maybe not being what the individual would hope for, the fact that they push themselves to take those steps is incredibly important. So it's been amazing to see the mindset of our students has really moved from maybe more of a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, as well as reflecting more or equally on the positive over the negative. Maybe it's equal now. But still, they're not automatically going to the negative, thinking that they're wrong and bad, and continuing that shame.
I'm just picturing how like that subtle shift to highlight, right? The self-awareness to identify what is a success to an individual person could also probably shift the overall culture. At least I'm envisioning this to be like really like gratitude focused, right? Because of that mindset shift. Now we're looking at we're looking on the positive side, right? Like it's almost, I almost equate it to like if you had a gratitude journal and you were writing 5 little things that you were grateful for on a daily basis, like, and you compare that person to somebody who doesn't do it, then that person who's actually journaling is going to actually look at like, what am I getting out of life? This is exciting, right? Like acknowledging the little things and kind of seeing the joy, and that person's going to thrive a lot more than the person who's not. And so I hearing what it is that you're creating, or some of these subtle shifts, right? That successes group is pretty phenomenal. So I feel like this is a really good, segue to me asking you this very loaded question, because it's coming. Do you see yourself as successful?
Yes. And I will say that took a lot of time, and probably up until like 2 years ago, maybe slightly before the pandemic, and then having made it through the height of a global pandemic led me to realize, okay, I must be doing something right. But seeing the work culture that I've established with the staff and the office that we have here, having it be a safe to be vulnerable workplace, people feel like themselves. And so I'm really proud of that. And there's a lot of success in that. Also being able to showcase that neurodivergent people can do the same things that people who are highly educated or neurotypical can do. I also am proud of myself and view myself as successful from having persevered through these moments in time throughout my life, probably up until 30 years of age, where I was down on myself and didn't think I could do anything, wasn't good enough. That was definitely the line running through my head since I was 5 was I'm not good enough. And so being able to move past that and validate myself and identify my small quote unquote achievements has led me to embrace and really be able to comfortably say out loud, I do feel I am successful.
Okay, so follow up from that is if you could give a piece of advice to somebody, and it could even be like, flashback to junior and senior year Samantha, right? Like the struggle is real. What piece of advice would you give that young person?
I would say, other than identifying your successes and hopefully parents perhaps encouraging that, asking questions that who says that I have to follow this path? What else is out there other than going to college? Or what else is out there other than studying something that is part of a high-paying job field where you might not actually enjoy that? So I would say ask questions and challenge statements that society or teachers or parents will send to you with the shoulds. You should be doing this. You should be doing that. Don't shit all over yourself, right?
I love that expression.
Me too.
Honestly, I feel like it can't be said. It can't be said enough.
I think I say it daily to many people and myself. So yes, that phrase is a gift, I think.
I completely agree. So I think, well, first of all, we could probably talk like ad nauseum, right? We could keep like this conversation going forever. But what I want to do is I want to end it here so that folks can just connect with you and carry this conversation, further and beyond. So how do folks connect with you?
Yes. So people can connect with me through my email, which is samantha@optionsforcollegesuccess.org, all spelled out. And they can also find information about Options for College Success on our website, which is www.optionsforcollegesuccess.org.
Awesome. And we'll make sure we also have a link to the Options for College Success website so folks can reach out to you there, or at least at minimum, if they're not interested in connecting with you, that they're familiar with the program and the work that you're doing, because that nonprofit does sound phenomenal for the right young person, and they don't have to be in Illinois to be there. So definitely check it out. And Samantha, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story, because clearly it takes a lot to go through the journey that you're at, but to also have that vulnerability and like the gift to be able to share it and be willing to share it is so impactful. So I just appreciate your willingness to come on the podcast today.
Thank you for having this podcast and bringing the guests on that you do outside of me, but it's phenomenal to be able to pass this on to parents that I work with, as well as individuals or young adults, because they need to hear this. They need to be reminded in many different ways that they don't have to do what they think they should do, or that they are told they should do.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. I want to thank my guests for joining me on this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it weren't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for our next episode, where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes, where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guest. Also, put a face with a voice by accessing their interview on the newly formed successissubjective.org website. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email me at Joanna, Joanna, @successissubjective.org. I would also be remiss if I didn't tell you to check out the collegealternative.org and lilyconsulting.com websites for additional resources outside of podcasting. If you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please do me a favor and subscribe. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to the Success is Subjective podcast on any other podcast playing app, such as Audible, Google, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. Last but not least, Success is Subjective is listener-supported, made possible by me and by you. You can support this podcast by joining the Patreon community at patreon.com/successissubjective. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.